Hey guys, Adrian here from digitaldojos.com, and I am back after a week-long trip, and I'm going to be pumping out tons of content covering iOS, Mac, Windows-based stuff, and a lot of hardware reviews. I have a lot of new hardware that I have in, and I have a lot of reviews to push out, so stay tuned for that. That being said, I get a lot of questions regarding iOS 7 and battery life. That's probably one of the top questions I always get, especially from people I know in person. Does your battery drain a lot, or what's your experience? And typically it differs from person to person, I've noticed, and the heavy usage on their phone, because that's what it really comes down to, the usage of your phone. Now, typically I can get through a day without having to worry too much about charging. However, as I was gone a week, I was really dependent on my iOS device as I wasn't, with my desktop. So that being said, I wanted to give my 5 top tips for saving battery life on iOS 7. Now, this can vary. If you're on a phone, this is a little bit more, obviously some things will settle with you more rather than if you're on an iPod Touch where you're not, taking it out as much or maybe just using it for music. But nonetheless, these will get you some extra time out of your device. So first and foremost, I want to talk about background app refresh. By going into your settings, this is a feature that is under the general settings. As you can see, if I go back, you go to general. This allows apps to essentially, when they're running in the background on Wi-Fi or cellular, in the background, it allows apps to essentially kind of refresh its content. So when you have apps multitasking, it can pull in new content, for example, the Facebook timeline, those sort of stuff. While you're not using them, it will go ahead and pull in new content. That way, when you switch to it, it has the new stuff that you want first and foremost. So this the blue arrow indicates if it's a location service. So you can disable a lot of these for stuff that you don't really need to be updated in the background. If the app is open, you can disable a lot of this. This does save on battery life because it's not constantly checking to see if it needs to refresh any content in the background. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2, I kind of just encompass this all in one, and I call it toggles. Toggling things that you don't need, radios, things that are sending off signals that you're not using in the background. The easiest way to do this, obviously in iOS 7, is just swipe up from the bottom here to get your new little control center here, where you can control things like you can toggle off your Wi-Fi, you can toggle off Bluetooth. Now, these are things that you're probably going to turn off if you're not using them. If you're out and about, you have your 4G, you probably don't really need Wi-Fi, so you can turn off that radio. If you're not using Bluetooth, you can turn off the Bluetooth radio, so on and so forth. Now, other toggles in here will include things like brightness. That's always a big one. If your brightness is always set to full, you may want to turn that off. Additionally, if you go into the settings of brightness here, so if you go into settings here and we find where brightness is, so let's go back, and wallpapers and brightness right here, there is a setting called auto brightness. Now, I'm going to turn it off here because that's something, if you, basically it has a sensor on the iPhone and it detects whether or not you're in lower light, the sunlight, and it automatically adjusts to that. Now, that's nice if you like that feature, but if you don't really worry, you like to have your brightness wherever you set it manually, then you're going to want to turn that off. Otherwise, the sensor is always running in the background looking to adjust the brightness. So that saves a lot on battery life. Other toggles that you can turn off, things like Siri, if you're not using Siri. Also within the Siri, or I should say within the Siri options, if you go in, there's something that basically has a sensor for Siri that when you go in to use it, if you raise it to your head, it will toggle Siri. Now, raise to speak, as you see right there, mine's turned off. So you can turn yours off. That way the sensor is not running. So again, these are just all sorts of toggles that you can adjust to save a ton of battery life. Number 3, also dealing with that of apps updates. If you go into settings, go under the App Store settings here. So we're going to go to the bottom, iTunes and App Store. This has settings for that of all of your iTunes stuff. Now, one thing you'll notice at the very bottom, they're automatic updates. Now, this is a really nice new feature in iOS 7. Basically, it downloads new purchases, including free ones, or updates on your apps, so that way all your apps are always up to date. Now, if you don't need this, especially if your battery's running low, you don't want it to be updating over the air. Now, you can also adjust it so you can do it over the cellular data. Again, that's all up to you. But if you want these features on, then you can have it on when you're on Wi-Fi. But if you're not really concerned and you want to do manual updates, then you can turn that off as well. One thing I do want to mention about the toggles, one thing that is a really, really big tip, obviously one of the biggest toggles I forgot to talk about, is that of 4G. If you're not using 4G, you can actually turn that off. If you're not using your cellular, 4G, you're not in a 4G area, that's a really good thing to turn off. That's under cellular. You can adjust that. That saves a ton of battery life. So if you disable 4G, if you're not using it, you're just on your regular 3G to receive calls, texts, those sort of things. That does save a lot of battery life, and that's one toggle I did forget to mention. Next up, number 4, location tracking. This is something that uses a lot because it's using the GPS data. So if you go into settings and then you go into your, I believe your privacy settings here, privacy and then location services, you can turn this on or off. I like to leave it on for some apps, but as you can see here, you can adjust which apps you want it on for. So for example, if I don't want it on Facebook, I can disable it. I don't want it for things like, let's see here, there's weather, obviously, so, certain things you're gonna want it for, other things you may not. You can disable it easily. Again, this means anytime you're in an app, it's going to use that GPS data to find out where you are, and that can take up a ton of battery life if it's constantly running. So you can turn that off altogether if you don't use any sort of location tracking applications or you don't post your location out. Then that's a really big thing to turn off so that radio is never running. Last but not least, a big thing, as you can see here, I get a lot of is email. Now, you can adjust the way you receive mail by going to the the settings under mail, contacts, and calendar, going under the fetch new data. Now, a lot of people prefer fetch over push. You can see I have one account for push here. The difference between fetch and push, essentially push is anytime a new mail comes in, you're going to receive it. Now, if your email is really that important and all of that, then you're probably going to want that on a push service. However, even though I run my business and my personal and work email via mail, I set it to manually fetch. This means anytime I open up the mail application, it checks for new mail rather than anytime new mail comes in. You can also set it to intervals 15, 30, and hourly. So this means every 15, 30, or whatever you set it to, it will essentially fetch at those times, and this saves a ton of battery life because it's fetching less frequently rather than just constantly waiting for mail to come in. Again, if you require, you have personal stuff or you have stuff that you need to keep in track and you need it when it comes in, then you're going to want to keep it to push. So these are my 5 top tips for saving iOS 7 battery life on your iOS 7 device. I hope it helps out. Love to hear your guys' tips if you have any. Throw them in the comments down below, and thanks for watching.